To begin with, I'd like to introduce the Isle of Dogs a little. Here's a map of the isle, which isn't actually an island. It's a large peninsula encircled by a meander in the River Thames. The Isle of Dogs is likely named because of its history as the kennelling ground of the greyhounds of King Edward III. However, there is no concrete evidence pointing to this theory. Some say the name is a corruption of the Isle of Ducks, and that it is so called in ancient records, from the number of wildfowl inhabiting the marshes. Today, it's most often referred to by locals simply as the island. The isle is in the east side of London, outside the walls of the Roman city of London. The terrain to the north and east of the city proper is notorious for its marshy moorfields. As such, the east end was relatively slow to develop, becoming notorious for its poverty. The location in a larger sense is more convenient as a shipping center because of its proximity to the English Channel and closeness to the end goal of where the goods would be shipped. The earliest known history of the island is probably the age of Roman Britain. Around 1844, a Roman coin was found on the island from around the year 300 AD, suggesting the Romans have reclaimed the marshy land of the isle before that time. Most historians argue, however, that a medieval date of reclamation is more likely. The inhabitants developed the land by encircling the marsh with a levee or embankment and drained the water through sluice gates. The embankment was built up of earth and chalk, reinforced with bundles of wood, much like a beaver dam, more than 15 feet high. A wall certainly existed by the 13th century when the first recorded references to repairs and build-up were made. The Crown appointed royal commissions to see after upkeep of the wall until October 1629, when the island flooded, and the upkeep was transferred to a permanent jury of marshmen and the commission of the sewers of the Poplar district of London. Landowners, too, made repairs to the sections of wall included in their properties. Over time, stone and timbers also began to be used in the construction of the wall. During some of the floods, a canal-like channel developed in the northwest part of the island, called the Great Gut. The neighborhood came to be because of both the rich, lush soil of the floodplain and its great use for grazing animals, especially sheep, its convenient location on the River Thames for docks and shipbuilding, and the high winds of the island, good for mills. Thomas Kemp, Bishop of London, oversaw the recovery of 500 acres of marsh and was awarded a lease on the land by the commissioners. But after his death, the island flooded again, and by 1529 it was under water. A chapel built by Kemp was ruined during the flood, and later the ruin was converted into a farmhouse, the dwelling of a horseman and grazier. Later, the chapel house was converted farther and rebuilt into brick, housing a few mean and inconvenient tenements. This painting from the 17th century pictures the Greenwich Palace and Park across the Thames from the Isle of Dogs. You can see how little development there was on the island at the time. A gabled house and barn can be seen in a wooded area to the north of the palace. The chapel house and the small grove were the only inhabitants of the inland portion of the isle for much of the island's history. As you can also see from this map, much of the effective use of the island came from the mills and the docks that began to develop on the water's edge. In this upper right detail of the painting, Greenwich and London from One Tree Hill by Johannes Fustermann, we can examine some of the architectural context in the area in time. The building on the hill is the Royal Greenwich Observatory, also known as the Flamstead House, named after John Flamsteed, the first Astronomer Royal. The designer of the observatory is Christopher Wren, a noted English architect, scientist, founder of the Royal Society, and designer of St. Paul's Cathedral. Commissioned by King Charles II and designed circa 1632, the Royal Observatory is possibly one of the most significant scientific locations of its time. Our systems of latitude and longitude, navigation, and time are based on its location as their 0 points. Greenwich Mean Time and the Prime Meridian encompass, and pass through the Royal Observatory, respectively. The geometry of the Royal Greenwich Observatory is quite rectilinear in plan, having a simple layout. The building focuses more specifically on the front facade of the building, enforcing verticality through the large square portion of the front and the double tower domes, whilst showing an almost Palladian symmetry of the wings. The furnishing and interior ornamentation of the observatory were somewhat Spartan, in accordance with the nature of the occupants and the exterior styling of the building. The main ornamentation in the illustration of the octagon room, from Iconographia Speculae Regiae Grenovici, is the pair of paintings shown on the wall, appearing to depict King Charles I and Charles II. The construction of the observatory is primarily brick and stone. The facade seems to be influenced by some details of early Baroque church fronts, such as the ornamental volutes seen on the Church of Santa Maria Novella or the Church of the Gesù, as pictured above. The Tower Hamlets is a municipal borough of the City of London, established in 1965. It includes 20 wards, 3 of which are considered to be included in the Isle of Dogs. The Isle of Dogs is composed itself of the Poplar, Millwall, and Limehouse districts, and the central business district of Canary Wharf. The creation of these districts came about midway through the 20th century, spurred on by the industry change and the Second World War. During the 19th century, especially throughout the Industrial Revolution, the Isle of Dogs became firmly settled in the shipbuilding industry and became one of the most important sectors of the docklands of London. The difficulty of the development of docks on the Isle was the lack of strong supply connections by land, meaning most or all materials had to arrive at the docks by boat. The meager land connection consisted of only 2 swing bridges. Over time, the inconvenience of land supply meant as the river's transport declined, the industry of the island receded to be replaced by wharfage and warehousing, and eventually by the 1960s to residences and buildings. The final coffin nail in the Island of Dogs shipping trade at the docks was the rise of containerization in shipping, which the Isle could not handle. Men working in the docks, on the whole, did not have a stable employment. Rather, they waited at pubs and other such points each morning, to be picked for employment that day by a foreman. This meant that the Isle had a larger working population in residence. The West India docks were built up in the area of the Isle known as the Great Gut. In the plan, the complex is very simple. A series of colossal basins connected to the Thames by canals and smaller mill ponds. The docks and the surrounding marshy areas completely cut off the more southern industry on the peninsula, making the name of island far more fitting. These large docks allowed ships to exit the river and moor in a calm slip for reprovisioning and movement of cargo. The West India docks were laid out into 3 main basins, the import, export, and south dock, with locks connecting to the river on both ends. The docks were each lined on each side by long buildings, emphasizing the horizontality and enormity of the space. Here are my key terms. Levee, an embankment built to prevent the overflow of a river. Also, dike, embankment, flood bank, stop bank, etc. Moor, a tract of open, peaty wasteland, often overgrown with heath, common in high latitudes and altitudes where drainage is poor. Sluice or sluice gate, a sliding gate to limit or stop the flow of water, especially in a lock gate. Earthworks, a large artificial bank of soil, especially one used as a fortification. Palladianism, a European style of architecture derived and based on the principles of the designs and writings of the Italian architect Andrea Palladio, who lived from 1508 to 1580. To wrap things up, here's the area as it is today, after the period of our focus on this course. The southern part of the island is principally a quiet residential area of flats, desirable for its proximity to Canary Wharf and the city and its calm demeanor. The island still holds the Mud Chute Farm, which is 32 acres of pasture and stables, free to visit, unpopular with visitors to the isle. The Millwall borough is dominated by residential housing. Canary Wharf straddles the edge between Millwall and Limehouse districts. Canary Wharf houses One Canada Square, the second tallest building in the United Kingdom, and many other such Starkitect glass tower constructions. The business district, though slow to establish, is now a major center of finance in the United Kingdom and the world.